It began in a California garage. But this wasn't a story about marketing genius or business empires. This was about something quieter, raw brilliance, soldered onto a circuit board by a man the world almost forgot. Before the keynote speeches, before the billion-dollar company, there was Steve Wozniak, a shy engineer with no interest in fame. And yet, without him, there would be no Apple. What happens when the heart of innovation beats in someone who never wanted the spotlight? And why do we remember one name while forgetting the one who actually built it? This is the part of the Apple story you've never really heard. Before Silicon Valley was a symbol of global innovation, it was just a stretch of suburban California. Quiet, tree-lined, ordinary. But in the 1960s and 70s, something was brewing beneath the surface. A restless energy, a fascination with the future, and a generation of kids who believed that technology could be more than just machinery. One of those kids was Steve Wozniak. Born in San Jose in 1950, Wozniak grew up surrounded by circuits and wires. His father, an engineer at Lockheed, taught him how electronics worked, not just as equations, but as puzzles. At a young age, Woz could already take apart a radio and rebuild it from memory. He didn't just use machines, he understood them. But Wozniak wasn't your typical future CEO. He didn't dream of power or recognition. He wanted to create things because he found joy in the making. The engineer's world, he once said, is a world of perfection. You build it, it works, and it's beautiful. High school introduced him to another curious soul, Steve Jobs. They were opposites in many ways. Jobs was charismatic, driven by vision and aesthetics. Wozniak was introspective, focused on function and design elegance. But they shared a love for invention, pranks, and bending the rules just enough to learn something new. One of their earliest collaborations was the Blue Box, a homemade device that could hack phone systems and make free long-distance calls. Illegal? Yes, but it wasn't about scamming the phone company. For them, it was proof that two kids could outsmart a global system with nothing but brains and soldering irons. That was the beginning, Wozniak later said. If we hadn't made the blue boxes, there would be no Apple. In the mid-1970s, the personal computer didn't really exist yet. Computers were the size of refrigerators and lived in corporations or universities. But a counterculture was forming. People who believed computers should be personal, accessible, even fun. Wozniak found his tribe at the Homebrew Computer Club, a scrappy, chaotic gathering of hobbyists, tinkerers, and dreamers. He brought his latest project to a meeting in 1976. A simple computer built around a new microprocessor from Moz Technology. It didn't look like much, just a single motherboard with a few chips and connections, but it was revolutionary. Wozniak had done something no one else had. He'd created a computer that didn't need multiple circuit boards or expensive custom components. It was efficient, elegant, and cheap. And more than that, it worked. Steve Jobs saw the potential instantly. While Woz imagined giving away the schematics to fellow tinkerers, Jobs imagined selling a finished version, a product, not just a project. Jobs convinced Woz to go into business together. And with a third co-founder, Ron Wayne, Apple Computer was born on April 1st, 1976. They started in Jobs' garage, funding their dream by selling what little they had. Wozniak's beloved HP calculator and Jobs' Volkswagen van. The first product was the Apple I, hand-built by Wozniak, packaged and marketed by Jobs. They sold 50 units to a local computer store. It was a modest start, but the idea had traction. The world was changing, and they were just ahead of the curve. Then came the Apple II, and that changed everything. Unlike the Apple I, which required users to add their own keyboards and displays, the Apple II was an all-in-one machine. It was colorful, it had graphics, it had games, and thanks to a spreadsheet program called VisiCalc, it wasn't just for hobbyists. It became a tool for business. In just a few years, Apple went from a garage startup to a company with millions in revenue. Wozniak, still modest and soft-spoken, quietly refined the hardware. His designs were elegant, his code precise. Every line, Every chip placement was considered. He wasn't just building computers, he was sculpting them. There were others too, unsung engineers and early employees who helped build Apple from the inside. People like Rod Holt, who engineered the power supply, or Randy Wigginton, an early coder who helped translate Woz's designs into usable programs. The culture was fast, creative, and a little chaotic, but it worked. Behind every product launch, there were sleepless nights, hand-soldered boards, and long conversations about what a computer could and should be. Wozniak wasn't trying to start a revolution. He was just trying to build something that felt right. And yet, a revolution is exactly what he helped create. By the end of the decade, Apple was growing faster than almost any company in history. They had offices, investors, and a new product roadmap. Their logo, a bitten apple, was becoming a symbol of the future. But as the company rose, something subtle began to shift. The world around them was speeding up. Expectations were rising. Investors wanted structure. Executives wanted control. And Wozniak, who had always cared more about creativity than corporate battles, found himself drifting from the center of the machine he had helped build. The dream was still alive, but it was no longer just theirs. And as Apple soared into the spotlight, the quiet engineer who made it all possible was starting to wonder if there was still room for the joy that started it all. By the dawn of the 1980s, Apple was no longer a garage startup. It was a rocket ship, fueled by vision, talent, and momentum. But behind the polished product launches and soaring valuations, the company was beginning to strain under its own weight. The Apple II was a massive success. But success, ironically, became the first fracture. Investors wanted more. The press started calling Apple the future of personal computing. And within the company, expectations became relentless. Steve Jobs, once a wide-eyed visionary, was becoming more demanding, obsessed with design purity, pushing deadlines, clashing with engineers. His ambition burned bright, but it often scorched those around him. Wozniak, by contrast, remained grounded. He didn't chase control. He didn't crave the spotlight. He just wanted to build. But building was getting harder. The Apple III, meant to follow up on the Apple II's success, launched in 1980. It was rushed. It was buggy. It overheated. I wanted to delay the release, one Apple engineer later recalled. We all did. But the pressure from above was clear. Ship now, fix later. Wozniak, though still technically involved, was beginning to feel the disconnect. This wasn't the same company he'd built boards for in the garage. Then came a more personal fracture. In 1981, Wozniak was flying his private plane when it crashed during takeoff. He survived, but suffered a serious head injury, memory loss. Recovery took time, and during that quiet period, something shifted. For the first time, Woz stepped back from Apple, and when he returned, it wasn't the same place. Jobs was already moving on, obsessed with the next product, a computer named after his daughter, Lisa. It was ambitious. Too ambitious. Over-engineered, over-budget, and when it launched in 1983, it flopped. To investors, it was a warning sign. To Jobs, it was a challenge to go further. To Woz, it was proof that something had been lost. That same year, the company hired a new CEO, John Sculley, former president of Pepsi. It was Jobs' idea. "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life?" he reportedly asked. "Or come with me and change the world?" But within a year, the partnership soured. Sculley wanted discipline. Jobs wanted magic. And in the middle of it all, Wozniak, the man who had literally built Apple's foundation, was drifting further into the background. He was still a board member, still respected, but no longer central. Then quietly, in 1985, he left. Officially, Woz said he never left Apple. But he stepped away from day-to-day operations, tired of the politics, the pressure, attention. He returned to teaching, volunteered at schools, built remote controls for fun. It stopped being fun, he would later say. That was his threshold. Not money, not fame. fun. And as Wozniak exited stage left, the company he co-founded spiraled into one of its most dramatic chapters. Steve Jobs was ousted by the very CEO he brought in. Infighting, power plays, declining sales, Apple lost its footing. By the early 1990s, the company was a shadow of its former self. Stock prices fell, products failed, innovation stalled, and woes? He watched it all from a distance. Disappointed, maybe, but not bitter. Because for him, Apple was never about power, it was about possibility. Still, the irony lingered. The man who co-built a personal computer revolution had quietly walked away from the revolution he helped start. In one interview, a journalist asked him, "Do you regret not staying and taking more credit?" Wozniak smiled and simply said, "No, I know what I did. There were no lawsuits, no exposés, just a quiet exit, and a legacy that the world would take decades to fully understand." And that leaves a haunting question in the air. What happens when you build the future, but choose not to live in it? In the story of Apple, Steve Wozniak is often seen as the quiet half, the one in the background, the other Steve. But when we step back, we begin to see a different truth. He wasn't just part of the story, he was the foundation. Without Wozniak, there would have been no Apple I, no Apple II, no spark that ignited the personal computing revolution. He didn't crave headlines. He didn't fight for boardroom dominance. And maybe that's why history almost forgot just how much he gave and what he walked away from. Because in many ways, Steve Wozniak lived a different kind of success. While others chased scale, he chased simplicity. While others negotiated stock options, he taught children how computers worked. And while others built companies, he built devices. Quietly, joyfully, precisely. It's tempting to romanticize the story of Apple as a tale of visionaries who changed the world. But that story often leaves out something important: the cost. The cost of speed. The cost of pressure. The cost of building something bigger than you ever imagined, only to realize it may no longer reflect the thing you set out to create. Wozniak once said, "Never trust a computer you can't throw out a window." It was more than a joke. It was a philosophy that technology should serve people, not intimidate them. That creativity should be joyful, not corporate. That sometimes walking away is not failure, but clarity. So what did it all mean? Apple became one of the most influential companies in history. Its products reshaped how we work, talk, think, even how we see ourselves. But the company it became was not the company Wozniak imagined in that garage. And that's the tension that lingers. The dream versus the reality. The brilliant machine versus the human cost. Still, Wozniak's fingerprint is on everything. In every smartphone. In every line of clean code. In every young engineer who believes that great technology starts with heart. He reminded us that innovation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums quietly behind the scenes. And maybe that's his true legacy. Not the stock price, not the fame, but a simple belief that the world can be changed by a curious mind, a soldering iron, and the joy of building something better. Because in the end, the engineer didn't need the spotlight. He just needed the circuit to come alive.